Welcome back. So this time let's talk sustainable housing for all. How achievable? Successful governments in Nigeria have continued to battle with the task of trying to bridge the wide infrastructural chasm that exists in every sector of the nation. This, no doubt, has contributed to the inability of the Nigerian nation to harness the gains that come to a country endowed with so many natural resources, both human and material. Is it possible for an individual or the resident of a country to be all that they need to be without roof or shelter over their heads?
And food in their stomachs.
And food in their stomachs. Some people.
But the emphasis today is on the housing.
Is on the
part.
shelter part.
Okay.
You know, we started with food in their stomachs when we talked about the demands of NLC. In some way, we talked about. Anyway, so we're looking at housing today. Is it possible? We have joining us here, Tony Ayinde, a physical planning consultant and development advisor. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Now, it was said at one time that we had a housing deficit. I'm not too sure, and I stand to correct. I think about 17 billion?
17 million.
Million or billion?
Million.
Million. Okay, I was jumping there.
There are only 170 million of us.
It's okay.
So right. What do you want a billion houses for?
What's wrong with having a billion houses? It's okay. Okay, so we have this wide gap, and yet the cost of land, acquiring land, whether allocated, even if it's going to be allocated, the cost of getting that land allocated to you is astronomical because of all the processes you have to go through, and in some places you have to settle some people. And then the cost of buying buildings.
Change, Nilta.
Okay, sorry. I said settle. I didn't say, did I say anything?
Settle. That's
then the cost of...
I'm sorry, Mr. Ayinde.
Okay. The cost of getting building materials to actually put the structure together. How can we go from here?
I think to start with, thank you for the opportunity to come here. To start with is to accept that the way you started, that food and shelter are actually part of the basics that Abraham Maslow identified as 5 basic needs of man. But we have found that what housing means, or what he called shelter, means different things to different people. Because for me, when you say shelter, it's probably just something that prevents the natural elements from hitting you. But as your value increases, or as the value you place on yourself increases, you will know that you need just more than shelter. And the question is...
Just more than shelter?
Yes.
I mean, can you describe this more than shelter?
Yes, you know, first you talk of shelter, something that just keeps the harsh elements away. And then, and I think is this idea of shelter, if you recollect in about 1975 or 1976, they were saying shelter for all by year 2000, not housing for all.
Okay.
Because you can actually have a shelter. And I think it's our struggle to meet this shelter and not housing that is making us not have what we need. Because you can actually have shelter and no infrastructure.
And house. What's the difference?
Now you can have a shelter not serviced by infrastructure. You know how we used to build in those days? You just build your house and you throw the conveniences outside such that you need to go a few meters away. And in the night, you are probably afraid that someone will attack you, so you don't even go out at all. And then you have the potty,
chamber pot,
yes, in the room where you can ease yourself out, which was not very hygienic. So, but we, as value began to increase, or as we began to realize that we needed to place more value on life, on man, we realized that we needed something more than ordinary shelter. Someone needs a house. In fact, you need a home where you long to go after a day's work. And it has been proved, sir, that where you live actually affects how you work or what you do at work. So that's the difference. The infrastructure that serves that place of abode makes a difference between just a shelter, a house, and a home.
A house is not a home.
It's not necessarily a home.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not
But
necessarily.
seeing the situation, let's come back to Nigeria here. I talked about the issue of acquiring land. That's on one side. And then the cost of building materials on the other. With this kind of challenges, is housing for all, now not shelter for all now, is housing for all
Pipe dream.
Now, what you have mentioned is reflective of our individualistic society model. In other societies where they are collectivist, the individuals don't go for their own land, their own cement, their own construction materials. That's not the way it works. And being individualistic is never sustainable, because what happens most times is that a lot of us are put under pressure by our landlords. I don't want to call them Shylock, who are also depending on those rents for their living. So as soon as the man increases the rent, the tenant thinks, oh, I'm going to collect rent allowance in bulk. Why don't I go and buy land? He does not even understand what it takes to put up a house. So he gets stuck immediately after he buys the land. And for him to get land at all, he has to move to the peripheral areas of the city, which probably do not have any infrastructure yet. So I think it's a wrong model for us to begin, as individuals, to begin to think about buying land, buying materials, and then having to construct by ourselves. It is not sustainable. It develops sprawls, which are often uncontrollable.
But isn't this a fallout of a decay in the system? Now, some will agree. There was a time we had federal housing estates, we had state housing estates. We had housing estates where people could live. Now we have individuals building estates and selling to others. Which of these two models would help to achieve housing for all?
None.
Even those two that are...
Yes, none, and I will tell you why. Those estates then were not based on any studies. Because apart from the fact that we answer why we need housing, we must also answer who are those that need it. What typology do they need? And where do they need it? Now, our needs are different. Because of the way we are organized, how our culture has organized us, some of those houses are meaningless because they are fixed. They just build them probably for those who don't need them. We find that some that were built in 1983 by the Shagari government are still in some states, lying unused. They are broken down and all of these things. Now, our culture fixes us to buildings, not minding whether we need it or not. We access buildings either because we have the money to buy it, or you have the position that gives you. You don't necessarily access a building by your needs. For example, I'm a family of 6. I have 4 children. One is married. I stay in a 3-bedroom duplex. Later, 3 of my children will go. You know what? I'll still remain there because I'm fixed to that building. And then we have 2 or 3 rooms empty,
lying fallow,
with no one using them. So, but if we have a very flexible system where I recognize that there's a founding family starting with a man and a woman who don't even have a child yet, they don't need more than a bedroom apartment. And as they grow, they begin to shift. And as they shrink, they begin to come back. You know, that way our housing becomes flexible, people can move around. But such houses are not built by individuals. Any house that you build by yourself, you are tied to it by sentiment, that this is my house and I don't want to move. And I think that's what we need to work on. It has to do with working on our societal values. Is it an apartment you need or a territory?
Now, tied closely to accommodation, housing, is the issue of money.